Okay, so we showed that you could create a matrix, and where vector contains the elements for the matrix, n row and n column specify the row and the column dimensions. Dim names contain optional row and column labels stored in character vectors. So they should be character vectors. That means, of course, if they're going to be names, you would expect them to be characters. The option byRow indicates whether the matrix should be filled in by row or by column. So the default is by column, as we saw. So it goes. So the matrix was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 20, but it goes this way. So the default is by column. If you want it to be by row, so that it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 like that, you would just set this one to the logical value true. Remember, we call true and false logical values. So you'd set it to true. Okay, then if we had done that, then this matrix wouldn't look like this anymore. It would look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 like that. Okay? The default is by column. So if you don't say anything, it's going to do by column. Okay, now here's another way that we could create a matrix. So here, what do we do here? All we're doing is making a row vector. It's just like it contains just 4 elements, right? We're putting it into this variable called cells. And here we have something called R1. We have something called R2. And we give that, we assign that to a variable called rNames. Obviously that means row names. And then here we have another vector, and we assign that to CNames. Now, matrix, cells, remember this is a vector, and in this case it's this vector. Number of rows is 2. Number of columns is 2. This time we set by row to true, right? So we changed it. So now it's going to enter it by row instead of by column. So we're going to get, instead of going down 1, then 26 this way, we're going to go here 1, 26 this way, then 24, then 68. Okay? And now we have the, I'm sorry, and here the dimension names, we didn't set that last time, but now we're giving it, we have to form what's called a list, and we say the first element in the list is rNames, and the second element in the list is CNames, and dim names should be a list, and it should be a list of 2 things, where the first thing will be the row names. So we used the these for the row names because we put this in here, and the second name should be the column names, and we used these for the column names because we put this in here. Okay, so we get this, and we have row names and column names. Okay? What's the difference between this one and this one? This one, they didn't do by row equals true. Now you didn't need to say by row equals false, but you can write by row equals false. But if you just left it out, it would also be done by row. By column. Okay? So here's the explanation if you want to read it. And they have these numbers here as well, so if you want to read that. You can identify rows, columns, or elements of a matrix by using subscripts. So we called that, we said I think I used the word subscript, or I used the word index actually, but you can also call it subscripts. So here, this is a subscript. We're using the subscript 3 to get the third element out of this matrix. So 1, 2, this is the third element. So this is, we could say we're using this can be called a subscript. It can also be called an index, but here he's using the word subscript. So he says, you can identify rows, columns, or elements of a matrix. Now we didn't do that before. We did it for a vector, right? That was just for a vector up here. But we used these subscripts. This was a vector. A was a vector, and we used the subscript to get an element out of that vector. But you can also do this for matrices. So how do you do it? So you do it like here. Okay, so if you have a matrix X, so here we have my matrix. Instead of X, we have this one, and then you put the square bracket, and then you close the square bracket over here, and you put a comma in there, and then you put something in here. You put a number in here, and you put a number in here. Let's see an example. Okay, here's the matrix. Now, before we check this, what we're talking about here, let's just check this again. So remember, we're creating a matrix. What's it called? In this case, it's called X. And we're putting in what elements? Remember, we have to put in a vector. This is the numbers from 1 to 10. And we didn't say, remember we had this thing byRow. And I said you don't have to say false. If you don't use this at all, it's automatically false. In other words, it's automatically by column. So they're not saying by row here, so it's going to be done by column. Now this is the number of rows, which is 2, but they didn't put in the number of columns, right? Remember last time we put in number of rows, but we also put in number of columns. But here they didn't do that. They forgot to do that. Or no, they didn't forget. You don't have to do it. Because if you say the number of rows is 2, then and there are 10 elements here, then the number of columns has to be 5. So you don't have to actually write both. You can just write one, and it will figure out what the other one has to be. So we have 2 rows. So you can see there are 2 rows, and we're filling it in by column. So it's 1, 2 down here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like that. Okay. So now we have this matrix X. Now let's skip down to this example here. So what does this mean? Now, okay, so what does this mean? Well, I said here. So what this means is that we're going to take the element whose row number is 1 and whose column number is 4. So in other words, it's the element in the first row, 4th column. So that's pretty easy to figure out. First row, 4th column here. So this is going to be 7. So this indicates 7. Let's see if they give us another example. No. Okay, but how about if I had put 2, 3 here? 2, 3. What would that mean? So it would be the second row, 3rd column, so it would give you a 6. Okay, so is this clear? Okay, so try this yourself right now. Create a matrix like this, and then try 1, 4, 1, 5, 2, 3. Try a few of them and see if you get it right. So pause the video and make sure this works for you. Okay, when you come back, let's see, what could this mean? And on the other hand, what could this mean? So these look kind of similar, right? This one and this one look a little bit similar, but not the same. So this one is missing the second argument, or the second element here, and this one is missing the first element. So if you don't specify the element here, it means you want all of them. So I didn't put a 1 here, which would mean I want the second row, first column. Oh, I forgot to mention. Forgot to say this. Almost always in math, in statistics, in programming, almost everywhere, the row is mentioned and then the column is mentioned. So it's always row, then column. R, then C. Row, then column. I've never seen it different than that. whether you're doing math, whether you're talking about matrices, or if you're doing databases and programming and you're talking about elements or whatever, it's always mentioned, the row is mentioned first and then the column. So this stands for the second row, and then there's nothing here. So that means all of the columns. So what this is going to give me is the second row, which is this row, and every element. If I had just put 1 here, in here, 2 comma 1, I would just get this element, second row, first column. But there's nothing in here, which means not just 1, but the whole thing. So what this is going to return when you type this is this whole row. So 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, and then in the same way, this is specified, so it's the second column, but the row is not specified, so it's all of the rows, but only the second column. So where's that? The second column is here. So it's these 2, 3, and 4. Now it doesn't give it to you as a vertical display, it gives it to you as this horizontal display, which might be a little confusing, but that's the way they do it. Okay? So this is 3, 4. Now remember, this 1 is just this is nothing. This is just like before. This is just showing you, like if there was a lot of data here, it means this is the first piece of data, then there could be like out to 10 here, and then a bunch more here, and this would be like the 11th one, or whatever. This 1 means nothing. Okay, it's just a guide for you in the display, when you have, especially when you have a lot. But this is not nothing. This is not nothing. This is not nothing. Okay? So, for example, this means what? So, remember, it's row, column. So there's no row specified, so it's all the rows, second column. So that's why we have that here, because this is the whole second column. This is the whole third column. This is the whole fourth column, and so on. Okay? So this is using a matrix subscripts. So you can read this here. The subscripts I and j can be numeric vectors. So they're saying the subscripts can actually be vectors. So that's a little confusing. So that's a little confusing, and it could be confusing to read. Now this video is getting long. I wanted to stop already, but let me just finish this one part. So here, in other words, what's going on here? So you could say, oh, wait a second, there's a comma here, and there's a comma here. We have 3 arguments. This one, then up to here, up to here, and then, but obviously that's not what's going on, right? This comma is inside these brackets, so you can't really treat it like it's just a free comma. Okay, so what's really going on is you have just 1 comma, which is good because it's a matrix, so we can only specify the row and the column, so we can only have 1 comma to specify 2 things, the row and the column. So the row is easy to understand. We're talking about the first row. So we're talking about the first row, but we're specifying something about column here, but we're using this to specify the column. This is kind of a little tricky, but not too tricky. What does this mean? This is a vector. What vector is it? 4, 5, just containing 4, 5. So what does all this mean? It means the first row, but what? Columns 4 and 5. So where is that? The first row, columns 4 and 5 means the 7 and the 9, right? And that's what we get, 7 and 9. Okay? So it's a little tricky to read it. You have to pay attention to it. And it's kind of like a puzzle to read this, right? And by the way, you couldn't just write, you can't write this, by the way. Let me steal this. Too bad you can't steal these things, but I can. Let me steal it here. Okay, so here it is. Okay, so x, I type x, we get that. And then let me first do this, show you that it works. And you should try this yourself. So pause the video and try this yourself after I do that. Okay, so try that yourself. and then come back. Now after you come back, you can also change the argument by row and by column. You can try working with that. In other words, where was that? By row, you can change that to true. Let's see what that does. So try that out also. But I wanted to show you that this works. That is, we do get 7 and 9 here, but this won't work. And I'm sure you won't even think that it might work, but I just want to show it to you. Okay, that won't work, right? It just doesn't make sense, right? You can only specify a row, information about a row and a column, and I have 3 here, so that just doesn't work. But this does work, because this takes it as a vector, not as like something with a comma in it. Okay, even though there's a comma in there, when it reads it from here, it takes it as a vector, not as something that has a comma in it. Okay, so so it works. So we get the first row and the 4th and 5th columns. So here, but this won't work. Okay, so you can see that. Okay, I should stop now and continue with the next video.